So this just to add a few elements to the profile, but also to say that what I am saying today is not. I'm not a real specialist of narratives of the understanding of European integration as a part of a sort of cultural elaboration. So what I'm trying to do is, and I was really very interested by the proposal to do this kind of presentation. What I'm trying to do is sort of to summarize the main elements that I think that can add non-Italian people to understand what is happening in Italy today, which I'm afraid is quite difficult to understand, as many things Italians in general. The main thing I think we need to focus is the radical change occurred in Italian attitude toward European integration. For a really very long time, Italy was the member country with the highest rate of adhesion to European integration, and this was true both at the level of political elite and of public opinion. And more, this included the acceptance of a federal goal, which is not so evident for all member countries. I remember speaking about that with Professor Georges Soutou, as you spoke about France in one of the last lectures, and he believed that in the end, especially in the 80s, the true difference between Italy and France was that in Italy this federal goal was stated and accepted. And the 80s is a key time from this point of view, and in May 1989, the sort of peak of this adhesion was reached when 88% of the 80% of Italian people who went to vote said yes in a consultative referendum asking if the European community should become, I quote, a true union with a government responding to the parliament, and if the parliament should elaborate a project for a European constitution to be ratified by competent bodies in the member state. And this was 88% of 80% of Italian people. And this general sort of universal adhesion to European integration was often explained as a symptom of a weakness of Italian national identity and of a low identification of the Italians with their state and with national institutions, a product of the elitist nature of the unification process, of the experience of fascism and defeat, and of the lukewarm identification with the state of both the post-1945 dominant political culture, the Christian Democrat, Catholic, and the Communist. And so this really widespread explanation was framed into the idea of European integration as a process moving from the nation state to the supranational perspective, and seemed to imply that this identification was likely to continue and even increase as the integration process advanced and the European common identity consolidated. And, however, according with the last Eurobarometer, Italy has now the lowest rate of inhabitants that consider that their country has benefited of being a member of the Union. And it is also the only country where more people believe that their country did not benefit from membership. 45% of Italian people believed that Italy didn't benefit in the past so far from being a member of the European Union, while 43% believe it did. And why also in Italy, as in many other countries, Maastricht has sort of accompanied the first noises against European integration. In fact, the declining support for the European Union and for Italian participation in the European Union has taken a sort of downward turn in 2006 before the crisis, and has accelerated in 2011, 2012. While in other countries the crisis has actually improved the attitude toward the European Union, at least in some countries, in Italy, these last years have seen a constant decline. So in the end, we have a rather sort of patchy picture, which to some extent is similar to that of other countries, but has some specificity, quite evident. The specificity has been further underlined by the more recent events, political events. The birth in 2013 of a new party, the Five Star Movement, that has, for the first time, totally politicized the European issue and has prompted the emergence of a distinct pro/anti-EU dimension structuring party competition, and a change in the very meaning of EU-related attitudes. So while some sort of criticism toward European integration has appeared largely before, 2013 has marked a real watershed. And even more, Italian disappointment toward the European integration has found a totally unexpected political expression in the March 2018 election, when two Eurosceptic parties, the Lega and the already mentioned Five Star Movement, have won, and they had set up a coalition government which has a really loudly spoken anti-EU platform. And even if both use anti-European rhetoric as a powerful consensus-building instrument, this is quite clear, they are also concretely challenging European rules, policies, and consensus in different realms: economy, climate, and of course migration issues. So this, maybe because I should learn to the other presentation, but my impression is this radical changing and changed picture has really no equal in Europe, not just for the kind of decline that the European integration process has registered, but also for the changed meaning and narratives that have occurred in the last period. And so what I'm going to do, I'm trying to start with the past and to explain the new pattern, the new kind of narratives, only after having sort of given a sort of explanation of what was before, because I really feel that you need to go through the whole period to understand change. Not only this, but also there are scholars in Italy that in fact believe that the current opposition to European integration has its roots, at least in part, in the very contents and nature and arguments of the pre-existent dogmatic and metapolitical Euro enthusiasm of the Italian elite. I'm not totally convinced of this point, but as an historian, I'm of course rather sympathetic with the view that we need to take a longer perspective. And so this is what I'm going to start with. And starting with the beginning, what marked Italy at the end of the 40s was the fact of being the country with the strongest communist party in the 50s. Of course, France was a little bit in the same. Yes, I was forgotten to go on with my. All right. Yes, sorry, I forgot the PowerPoint. Of course, France was more or less in the same situation, but the strength of the Italian Communist Party lasted longer than in France. And the Italian Communist Party continued to increase its electoral result until 1975, where everywhere in Western Europe the Communist Party had become really almost irrelevant. Therefore, in this first sort of 20 years or so, Italy was by no means unanimously favorable to European integration. Of course, the firm control of power on the part of the DC and the Christian Democrats and its belonging to the Western Bloc allowed Italy to choose Europe, as was said, in 1948, 1951, in 1957. Certainly, European integration was seen by both sides in Italian political sphere as a dimension of the Western choice. That is, the choice for a kind of liberal, capitalistic, welfare state model. And considering a rather widespread suspect toward Atlanticism in Italy from both the left but also a relevant part of the Christian Democrats, European integration was seen as the good side of the Western choice, meaning economic growth, consolidation of democratic institutions, of course, also the possibility for Italy to recover a diplomatic role in the West, all this without the military dimension proper of the Atlantic Alliance that was quite disliked in many parts of the Italian political spectrum. When it came to 1957, Italy engaged in the negotiation of the Rome Treaty, trying to secure traditional aims, such as the protection of Italian migrant workforce, investment, and financial aid from the richer partner. In particular, Italy wanted to build a national steel industry, and this was one of the real main aims in the party. But being the poorer and the less industrialized of the original members, Italy expected to benefit of the economic solidarity and to create markets for the agricultural products of southern Italy. So there were very traditional aims, and I wouldn't say that at this time there was any kind of specific narrative toward European integration. Of course, the Christian Democrats worked quite a lot on the legitimation of this policy in terms of Western aims and Catholicism, etc. But surely this process was in Italy too, and maybe in Italy more than in other places, a very elitist process, no doubt of that. During the 1960s, however, participation in the common market created an environment where Italy could not only sort of get important success in its economy, but also define itself in a fuller way as a part of the most advanced, sort of civilized and gradually also progressive part of Europe and of the West. The 60s were the moment in which Italy encountered modernity in European integration, and this started to change the perspective. And then a second important political change came during the next decade, when domestic detente between the Communist Party and the Christian Democrats that mirrored the international detente led the communists to give up condemning European integration as purely the tool of a sort of international capitalism, etc. As the PCI, the Communist Party, tried to distance itself from Moscow, a progressive European community started to be seen as the solution for a party that was trying to redefine its identity without fully renouncing anti-Atlanticism, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism. And even when the Christian Democrat PCI alliance finished in 1979, and it finished with the PCI vote against Italian adhesion to the European monetary system, still in the next period, in the next decade, support of the PCI part for a progressive European integration was confirmed. And even if Eurocommunism, that was, of course, this Berlinguer, the secretary of the PCI party, idea of how European integration and communism ought to sort of produce a sort of third way between East and West didn't really made a headway. So with this sort of conversion, there was a sort of domestic political consensus on Italy's path in European integration. And this the decade, the 80s, were in fact the peak of the support for European integration in Italy. And this political background of a sort of reconciliation and the search for a specific path that was sort of able to keep together a otherwise not so sort of peaceful coexistence within the country, that this worked very well as a sort of a common ground. And this was also the time in which a proper narrative of European integration was shaped, part as a consequence of the direct election of a parliament, I would say, that made the thing quite popular. I was in high school in 1979, and I perfectly remember people coming, the volunteers of the federal movement coming to speak to the students, and it was really a great moment of political activism in Italy and everywhere, in the view of the direct election of the European Parliament. At the same time, this was, we know, the time in which the idea of the democratic deficit started to appear clearly to the people, both in Brussels and in the national leading circles. And so I think we understand that the need for sort of more communication and a clear narrative emerged. And the 80s in Italy were really the period in which Europe became present everywhere. And Altiero Spinelli, whom nobody had really known before, was, of course, at once a very known person, and his project for a federal reform of the EEC was very much associated with an Italian contribution to the development of European integration. And the Milan European Council was another key moment in this narrative of Italy being a protagonist in international, European, but in fact it was international politics. So Andreotti and Craxi at Milan. I'm not sure that this photo I found is of the Milan Council, but certainly both of them considered the Milan European Council as sort of a high moment of their political career. And also Italy's delay in ratifying the European Single Act was motivated on political reasons, because Italians considered that it didn't go far enough in the development of federal or sort of supranational, anyway, forward institution. So this is really the height moment of visibility of Europe and general shared consensus. What was Europe at the time? It was first of all a model, and a model of a state, of a system granting social rights, where state-owned economy like Italy's could be accommodated, and state initiative for the Mezzogiorno, for southern Italy, could be implemented and further supported. It was a model for democratic stability. Italy has just sort of survived the terrible period of the 70s with domestic terrorism and the kidnapping of its prime minister, and fighting a democratic environment in which the domestic democracy could sort of feel safe. This was extremely relevant, as well as the idea that that Europe was sort of forwarding the East-West detente, even at a time in which the United States and USSR seemed to be on sort of collision direction. But also, I would say that the Europe of the 80s, in spite of all Italians speaking about federal aims and supranationalism, in fact seemed to be a place where a reinforced national self could be accommodated, because after all, the European community of the 80s was strongly made a large space for intergovernmentalism. And then again, in a time of sort of new political ambition, Europe could be a political actor in the impending political globalization and a dynamic economy in which the new small and medium industry sector in Italy and the specialized agriculture could prosper. So I would say that there was a very widespread political support, but also the social groups, trade unions, really generalized support on the ensemble of the society. On the other hand, this was also the period in which this very strong idea of vincolo esterno was elaborated. It was Guido Carli, this man who sort of has lived through all the second half of the 20th century in very different positions at the top of the Italian economy, both private and public. It was in 1979 that he praised Europe as the sort of binding element that would help the Italian elite make people accept the measures the Italian elite deemed necessary to reform Italian economy and administration. Italy in the 80s was, this is true, a sort of dynamic economy and renewing society, but it was also a country with very high unemployment, with a huge public debt that was increasing. So there were a lot of economic problems that the Italians government were not able to sort of face. And the idea of vincolo esterno, of this external binding that was a set of formal and informal obligation rules, influences, cultures, models that arrived from Europe could help this leadership to make people sort of accept wage containment. This was the end of the mechanism that sort of anchored the salary to the rate of inflation, a liberalization of the labor market, the separation between the Bank of Italy and the Treasury. The Bank of Italy became independent, and this put an end to the public financing of public debt. And this was at the origins of the huge foreign debt Italy had since then started to accumulate. But this vincolo esterno also meant that technical decisions, in fact, they were not technical, they were political, but they were proposed as technical, taken by restricted circles of technocrats. Very often it was the sort of top position of the Bank of Italy, or by technicians fulfilling roles in government in key moments, could replace democratically elected bodies, in particular in economic areas, relieving them from the responsibility of unpopular decisions. This was sort of a depoliticization of a set of decisions that in fact were taken without assuming the political responsibility of them. And this started, to some extent, one can say that the vincolo esterno was sort of phrased and used since the late 40s to motivate Italian adhesion. Are you trying to tell me something?
I'm sorry, Edna. We talked about that beforehand, but as it appears, Jan Wouters has arrived in Munich and has found a place where he could give his presentation. May we interrupt you here at this point and you take up the 90s a little later? Here she is. Thank you very much, Elena, for being patient.
No problem at all. I'm sorry that apparently Jan had no time for questions. He had to run away, but...
It's 20 minutes. It's in 20 minutes, so he really has to hurry.
Excellent. Much better than me that I am using a lot of time, but I will be quicker now.
You don't have to, because we are now again among us. And I will close my microphone and leave the floor to you. Just find a point where to get back to your presentation. Thank you and see you soon.
Yeah. So I'm just moving on quickly on that. There are quite a lot of questions that historians are asking themselves about this period, and in particular the period leading to Maastricht, that in fact to some extent seems to be a difficult choice for Italy to take, but in fact was taken basically on the basis of the vincolo esterno logic, etc. It seems that the core point in Italian politics was the determination of the Italian leadership to stay in the inner core of Europe. And this again is something that we need to discuss in relation with today. But moving on quickly to the 90s, at that time, a sort of transformation of the political system in Italy happened. The end of the Cold War in Italy was also the end of a political system that had lasted since 1945. 1907. And after the early 90s, Italy adopted a new electoral system, a sort of partial renovation, and in fact, two different narratives of Europe for the first time appeared. And on the one hand, there was a right or a center right who started to be critical about European integration, while the left, that was sort of amalgamating itself in different forms, and finally in 2007 took the shape of the Democratic Party via the union between the former left link, the left branch of the Christian Democrats and the former communist. So they became the sort of custody and the promoter of more integration. Again, a sort of idea very sort of metapolitical, as it has been said. And this sort of bipolarization moved on until the crisis, and that really accelerated the deterioration of the public opinion with relation with European integration. And I think that if we can sort of focus as a symbol of this complete upturn of the opinion in Italy about European integration, if we look at the experience and at the person of Mario Monti, who had been enormously appreciated and estimated person in Italy. He was a renowned economist, and he had been a commissioner for competition and very praised for that. And then he was asked in 2011 to sort of save Italy from the catastrophe of the possible crisis of its public debt. And this is what these technicians, as it was called, government, did, choosing sort of very severe austerity policies, and in his word, still saving Italy. And this person, in return on 1 year or little more, became the personification of everything that was wrong in European integration and in the way in which Italy had been participated in European integration. And the 2013 election that I was mentioned before were the moment in which this five-star movement obtained for the first time 25%, and then the 2018 last year election has seen no more just the five-star movement, but the five-star movement and the Lega obtain huge amount of votes and set up this openly Eurosceptic government. I think that I'm not going to explain unless anybody wants to know more about the platform of both parties. Maybe what I really would like to underline is, on one hand, the point that all institutions of the European Union are at this moment sort of attacked by both of them parties, and in particular one of the institutions, that is the Commission, has sort of been sorted out as the one to put under process, and this is a complete reversal of a typical attitude of sort of past Italian approach to the European community, which actually is the thing that Mario Monti very recently in February 2019 still wrote on the Corriere della Sera. The Commission was considered to be the sort of a guarantee of the common good, but also of Italian position. And this has completely gone. And the other point is on the complete reversal of the relatively positive idea of the sort of Franco-German couple that, of course, has toujours always been looked at by Italy with some suspicion, but at the same time was appreciated as the force leading the development of European integration. Now, and this image I put here is very clear upon that the idea is that poor Italy Cinderella, which is a very sort of ancient way in which Italy has been depicted in European integration, is forced to clean the European flag while the bad sisters and what is the English for matrigna, I don't remember, looked upon. So this is a sort of a very sort of pessimistic and victimistic attitude, and sort of that increase the feeling of rebellion that Italian public, widespread public, is feeling about European integration. There are sort of projections about what can happen with the European election at the end of May, and the more sort of relevant, to say, point that seems to have sort of general support by all these people that make tests is that the Lega will gain about at least 33% of the vote, and it is expected to become the second party for dimension in the European Parliament after the CDU-CSU. The rest is much less clear. The Five-Star Movement is sort of declining in consent, so it's really difficult to know what they are going to do at the election, and the other party has, for different reasons, in a situation of crisis. So I think that I am stopping here, and thank you for listening.
I'm sorry, Elena, you just missed your applause because I opened the microphone a little too late. I'm sorry.